and some of you may have gotten a little note in the mail this week, the snail mail, the U.S. Post Office Postal Service situation, just about the co-op. The Atlantic Theater's co-op is live. You can get information on exactly what that is and how to join on our shiny new website, beachesvineyard.net. You'll find the tab there. But the co-op is basically our way to organize, communicate, promote, and fund all the different creative ventures that are maybe kind of unique. Do you know that? It's an English law. So, just break the law. Well, I'm going to try to obey it this time because I can tell it's me trying to hedge my bets here. But this is a unique expression of church, what church is. And we've undergone some considerable changes in a relatively brief amount of time, I think. And many of you that are in here have been a part of this church for a very long time. Some of you from like the very beginning. So, just in reflecting on the year that was and thinking about the co-op and looking towards the year that's coming, I just found myself like feeling extremely grateful for the high degree of trust and faith and open-mindedness and open-heartedness. Is that a thing? It's got to be, right? Okay, thank you. That you've extended to us to be here and to continue to invest and to allow this transformation, like the old caterpillar climbs into the cocoon and it doesn't grow wings, it actually dissolves into goo and then is reconstructed as a butterfly. This blew my mind the first time I heard this. And so, as it is in change, you kind of want to rush through the goo stage. But as it turns out, the goo knows better than we do. And so, I just want to say thank you for the patience and the trust. And I also wanted to give just a moment, if there's anybody who would want to share. This isn't a rhetorical question, but you can actually answer this. Sort of given the uniqueness of our situation, our community here, I wonder what you found in this place. If you were going to take just a moment to name what it is that you experience being a part of this, or even just visiting, what keeps you coming back? What are you doing here this morning? Say visiting? Like it. No, me too. Is it? What is it? The who? Ooze? The Samoan word for family is what now? Ooze?
Like ohana.
Yeah.
Ohana means
family.
ooze means
Family. All right. The ooze. Secret of the ooze. Just like the goo. All right. Well, let's take just a minute together here. Let's take a moment just to collect ourselves and to check in on ourselves as well. And if it's helpful for you, you can take just a few deep breaths right now. That's what I'm going to do. We can take a few deep breaths together and just kind of settle into where we are. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we pause now to acknowledge your presence here, within us and between us and around us. And we ask that we would experience the grace of being truly collected and attentive within ourselves, within this place. We ask that we would have eyes to see and ears to hear, and that we would experience the reality that is always happening at the deepest level of who we are, this place of rest, wholeness, the sense of being held by what we cannot hold. May we come home, may we be here, so that both the words that are spoken and the words that are heard are experienced in the same place. And we thank you, Jesus, for showing us the way, for being the way. And it's in your name that we pray. Amen. All right. So we're going to take a brief Christmas detour away from Parabola series, which we started in the fall of 1994. Take a little break. We're going to circle back into a series, Light and Shadow. We actually put this together last year at Christmas time. This is our Advent series last year. I decided a couple weeks ago to dust it off and take a look at it and see if I still believed anything that I said last year. And I did. But this kind of funny thing happened while I was reading these two teachings from last year, and this is what happened. It actually sort of floored me because this last 2023 will be a year that I shall remember for all time, I'm pretty sure. It's a highly unusual year for me. And rereading these two messages that were delivered in December of 2022, I realized, my gosh, Bobby, if you could have practiced what you preached. Comes up with these English words anyway. It's like they're just to confuse people. If you could have practiced what you preached, you would have experienced, oh my gosh, a fraction of the suffering that you did. And I'm not being mean to myself, or am I accusing me of, not practicing what I preach. It's just this funny thing, I think, happens. And it's like, there are truths that have always been here that we've just been not aware of, not conscious of. And they come up into consciousness, and they kind of can sometimes displace or dissolve old things that we felt to be true, or they just seem like the most important thing in the moment, like the place where the invitation is, the thing to pay attention to. And for me, those things kind of make their way into my mind, and then they become something of my meditation. But the danger of seeing and recognizing these things, and then especially, if you want to call this a danger, talking about it, speaking them into existence, I feel like God has a kind of way of being like, okay, you see it, now let's test it. And this certainly happened this year, and I am just now to the point where I can say I'm grateful for it. It's the fun, the Bible keeps saying, rejoice in suffering, and you're like, what? Because it actually doesn't say like rejoice after suffering. That's like, sometimes that's not even like, doesn't even seem feasible. But there is this movement in life towards, I don't know, maybe you've lived long enough and learned enough lessons that you start to recognize when you're being taught something. And rather than fighting it tooth and nail, just begin to accept it. And in that acceptance comes at least the potential for joy in the midst of it. So, so this is Light and Shadow, Redux, take 2. And I'm going to begin by reading just a few few passages for us, and we'll treat this like a Lectio Divina or like a Visio Divina. There's images to go with each of them, and we're going to take our time through these. And I'll just invite all of us to notice what you notice. And if something really grabs you, it's quite fine to stay with that for as long as the energy's there. All right, so this is Isaiah 45. I form the light, and I create darkness. I bring prosperity, and I create disaster. I, the Lord, do all these things. This is Psalm 139. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, well, there you are. If I make my bed in Sheol, well, there you are. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light become night all around me, well, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night shines like the day, for darkness is as light to you. Here's Carl Jung. He said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And this is Matthew 1. Behold, the virgin shall be with child, and shall bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which when translated means God with us. So what do you notice there? What are you present to? God is always with us, and it's very difficult for the human mind to consider darkness as light. Opposites. There's always light in the darkness. Sometimes you just have to look a little harder. That's interesting. Making the darkness aware of the light, which is sort of the introverted, the reverse, the other side of the coin from that Jung. To make the darkness conscious is also to make the darkness aware of the light. We carry the light within. Right? So maybe this is where, maybe the healthiest place to begin the search. Joy in the darkness is the light. Well, I like this word, Emmanuel, God with us. God with us. It reminds me that God is with us in a deeper place, in a quieter way. Reliably, even if sometimes seemingly imperceptibly, God is with us. God exists down in here, deeper than our best desires for God, than our greatest attempts to locate God. God exists when we call off the search for God. Meister Eckhart wrote back in the 14th century, it's that God is at home. It's just that we go out for a walk. And the more that these move from the realm of concept, and honestly, they're helpful as concepts, as something to remind ourselves of, to sort of heal the wound of separation, which really is where all the rest of the mess comes from this experience of separation, and from the feeling that, this time I've wandered too far from home, this feeling like I can't imagine the number of, just whatever religious practice you have, to ground down, to center in, to come back, however, how many, this is going to, oh my gosh. After last Tuesday, the number of Hail Marys it's going to take to get back to zero. This feeling? Gone too far. And it just isn't true. The scriptures, they say that it's in God that we live and move and have our being, meaning we're surrounded. And St. Paul said, do you not realize that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, which means we're indwelled? I remember one time talking to my son, and he was young. He was probably 3 years old, I would wager. And he was asking me about hell. I don't remember how that came up. But he was like, what is hell? And so I got out Dante's Inferno, and we did I'm just kidding. I was trying to think of how to explain it to him, and I remember somewhere along the way, somebody had explained to me, well, hell is anywhere where God isn't. Okay? So hell is the absence of God. And so that's what I told my son, and he didn't say anything, which concerned me. And then he said, I don't think there's anywhere that God isn't. And then I remembered, the Bible saying things like, if I lay my head in Sheol, there you are. And it really is the belief in separation. This deep-set, profoundly ingrained, felt urge of separation that all the rest of the mess flows from. And salvation, healing, wholeness is the dispelling of this illusion, this returning home. And it begins with just consciously choosing to believe we're already home. And then paying attention to how we're feeling and how we are interacting with the world and the types of, just note it, just the other day, there was a lot of laundry to be done, and so I was doing the laundry, and I noticed that I was rapidly just shoveling clothing from one machine to another, and all this kind of bound up sense of sort of anxiety, because there's always just so much to get done, this feeling. And I fortunately, miraculously even, noticed that I was feeling that way, and as soon as I noticed that was the energy with which I was approaching this very nominal task, it's like all the anxiety just evaporated, and I started to think, look at this washing machine. What a miracle. Thank you. And look at all these clothes. Why on earth do we have this many clothes? And what a gift to be warm when it's cold out. Something about just noticing the where we are and the energy that we're bringing to a task. Even just the noticing it, we can sense the separation, and we can sense beneath that the union, the joy that brings light to the darkness, this gratitude that's really at the base of everything. In the Christmas story, really early on, we read this, the next slide there, Ben, that this angel comes to Mary and tells her, we've heard this so many times that I think sometimes the shock value, wears off. But like an angel appears to this young woman and tells her that you are soon to become pregnant with God. Right? Yeah, exactly. Like I've had a lot of difficulty processing. It's significantly easier to swallow things than that. And she's most likely like a 14-year-old girl. Become pregnant with God. So her immediate response is sort of shock, disbelief. Did you have the right address? And at least how the scriptures present it, Matthew's gospel, she moves pretty quickly through this stage of disbelief. And her response is so beautiful and it's so instructive. And on the other side of doubt, on the other side of second guessing, on the other side of are you sure? She just says, may it be with me as you say. So may it be so. Let it be. She welcomes this new reality. And it says straight out of there that what she did is she pondered all these things in her heart. Her immediate response wasn't to go tell it on the mountain. But it was to treasure, to store up, to ponder, to hold all these things in her heart. And that's what I want to talk about for a minute here this morning is the heart. What do you suppose the scriptures are talking about with this word heart? This place where Mary treasured all these things. What is the heart? What is its function? It's like this storehouse, this place that we can check in to be reminded that, we've made it this far. And so maybe we can continue to trust. Yeah, and so maybe the heart is that place that can say yes to the impossible, whereas the mind is just going to keep picking it apart and figuring out how it's going to happen. What exactly is the process of becoming pregnant? You know what I mean? There's always the head's like, can I give it just a little more information, and I might be able to get myself to a place of trust and somewhere deeper than the thoughts that will just keep coming. Is this place of acceptance. So maybe not a bad idea to keep some kind of an inventory. I remember one time, Joe, the old pastor of this church, said something along the lines of, he's like, I've heard people tell me that, they don't meditate. And I've said, well, actually we all meditate. One way to think of that word is just what it is that we're turning over and over and over again in our mind. What's the story that we keep telling ourselves? And sometimes when you check in on that, because that tape just seems to keep playing, and checking in on the story that we're telling. I mean, I've had times where I've checked in and been like, oh my gosh, you should never let anybody talk to you like that. You? It's interesting to think of the heart as a dimension of reality. The way the contemplatives and the Christian tradition described prayer was introducing the mind to the heart. I was traveling with the mind down into the heart. And you can't try to understand. Yeah. And what happens is the mind slowly, finally, begins to slow down. All right, so I want to look at this Old Testament verse. I think it's important to consider. This is Jeremiah 17. This is a pretty famous verse, I think. This is Jeremiah 17:9. In most of our English translations of this verse, it goes something like this. The human heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Sometimes it says desperately wicked. Who can understand it? So forget the whole thing. And I've wrestled with that verse. I kind of accepted it wholesale growing up. Because, you think, oh, look at all this nasty stuff I'm capable of. It's probably right. And the further we move along, the more aware I become of, I think, some of the damage unnecessarily afflicted from a verse like this, a translation like this, being almost the baseline of how we experience ourselves. There's a lot of theology that comes out of that. I heard somebody say, for whatever reason here in the West, most of our theology begins at Genesis 3, which is the fall, instead of at Genesis 1, where God said, it's good. Everything's good. And where we begin our story, the trajectory that we set often has a lot to do with where we finally end up. So I did some digging around in this verse, and I found a few interesting things. So deceitful, this next slide, is an English translation of a Greek translation of an ancient Semitic word that's very confusing and difficult to translate. Surprise! That's this word akab, and it means it's only mentioned 3 times in the whole Old Testament, and every time it's mentioned, it's interpreted in a different way, and the ways are like totally different. One of them is like a narrow path. One of them is a heel, and the other one is, I can't forget, something, a pair of glasses or something. You're like, what do these have to do with each other? But akab means heel, the lowest part of the body. And so because of its association with Jacob in the Old Testament, Jacob means the heel grabber. Remember the story of Jacob? His brother, he's got a twin, his brother's being born first, and Jacob comes out holding onto the heel. He's trying to get to that birthright in utero. And so because of its association with Jacob, heel grabber, it's associated, the translation becomes deceitful, because Jacob was he's a little trickster. The 7 translators of the Septuagint, which is the earliest Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, it was completed around the 2nd century. So there were 7 translators who contributed to the Septuagint. And what I read is that without consulting each other, all 7 of these translators arrived at a completely different Greek word to describe the heart. They didn't use the word akab, they used the word bathuno, and it means deep and hidden things. What's the trouble with deep and hidden things? There's probably some deceit mixed in there, right? Is that the totality of things that are deep and hidden? No. Interesting. And so the Septuagint, the same verse, they translate it this way. The heart is deep beyond all things, and it is the person. And who can know it? I really like how that one sounds. It's like, whoa. Took a little look. Lots going on in there. Not sure. What time's the football game? So bathuno, in Greek literature, if you compare it to Greek literature at the time the scriptures were written, it is a word that is most often used to express the deep sea, like what's happening in the ocean. Bathuno, deep and hidden things. Some time back, my kids started showing me images of some of the critters that are crawling around like what's the trench there? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, these things that have like grown light bulbs and stuff? You know what I mean? I wish I had a picture of it. Yeah. I didn't grow up fishing. Grew up on the water, didn't fish much. Still don't really know how to handle the types of things that you pull up from the ocean. They just don't really seem like us. And they're slippery, and they've got like pokey parts in places you wouldn't expect. And it does seem that the deeper you go in the ocean, the more bizarre the creatures seem to be. Do you see the metaphor? You picking up on what I'm laying down? Okay, thank you. And so I have a hunch that the reason this verse has become translated the way that it has, and the way that we're familiar with it, maybe most familiar if we grew up in the church, is because it's actually a lot, in some ways, it's more comfortable to call the heart deceitful than it is to recognize the amount of time, attention, focus, surrender required of us to begin to have even a cursory understanding of who it is that we actually are. But if we call the thing deceitful, well, then we can kind of leave it up to the professionals, to tell us what to do and how to do it. That song, I want to know what love is, but I want you to show me. It's like, I want to figure it out. Just, can I get a demonstration of? That's right. If you think about the temple system, maybe you've heard of this, like the way that it was set up in Old Testament days was that on, I think it's Yom Kippur. Is that the Holy of Holies? What's the one day? Does that sound right, Yom Kippur? There was only one day a year that the high priest, and only the high priest, could enter into the Holy of Holies, the very center of the temple where it was said that God dwelt, his presence dwelt. And there was this incredibly complex series of ritual cleansing that had to happen, preparing the high priest for that one day when he could enter this very center of the temple. And I've heard stories, have you heard this? That this is why they would wear bells. There'd be a little rope tied around the ankle of the high priest, and if he went in there and any blemish was found, he would be struck dead, and they'd have to drag him out, get a new high priest. And so baked into the bread is this idea that there are some things that are too deep to be understood, and therefore are best left unexplored. And that hopefully, I'm trying to be nice here, because I actually really, I'm a pretty religious guy. I don't really have a problem with organized religion or unorganized religion. It's just you begin to see the impulse, the compulsion to defer the work of transformation and freedom to a priestly class, even on the other side of the New Testament, which completely explodes that model. Jesus warned about it directly. He said, be careful if anybody says, like, here's the kingdom. I just saw it. It's over here. Follow me. Or it's over there. Or it's coming later. Or it's for some of you, but not all of you. Jesus said, be careful of that, because the fact of the matter is, the gospel, the good news is that the kingdom of heaven is within you. And that word within is another one that we've had a hard time translating, I think because it freaked us out. Because Jesus made that statement to a mixed group, and it was a direct response to the Pharisees who were asking questions. So in a lot of the newer translations, it doesn't say the kingdom of heaven is within you, it says among you. But the word within is en, the Greek word's en, E-N, it means in. It doesn't mean among, it means within. But my best guess is that because his response was to the Pharisees and we're like, well, the kingdom, those are the bad guys. It must mean it's like in the vicinity. The kingdom of heaven is within you. So St. Paul he called himself the Pharisee of Pharisees, He's like, look, if anybody's got this Jewish thing figured out, it's me. I've seen it from the inside. So knowing this temple practice of this journey into the Holy of Holies, that only the most sacred among us are allowed to enter this place, he made this statement, which I can't imagine the level of controversy at the moment. He said, do you realize that your body, not that building, it's your body that's the temple of the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit lives in you and was given to you by God. And at the center of the temple is the heart. And this is the Holy of Holies. It's where God eternally dwells, and we can't send somebody else in there for us. And the gift, as Jeremiah goes on to explain, the gift of at least attempting this journey. The gift is the ability to, it's awakening, it's salvation, it's having the mud rinsed from our eyes. It's being able to look out and begin and see reality for what it actually is, not for what we wish it would be or hope it will become. And Jeremiah says this, he says, it's me, it's God. I am at the heart. I am the root of things. And because of this, I treat things as they actually are, not as they pretend to be. And so it seems to me that the Christmas message, at least partly, if we're honest, is an opportunity to begin a long journey to see things for what they actually are. And if you think about Jesus, the story, just you peel it back a little bit and allow it to be fresh for just a moment. We find that Jesus, he's the son of a teenage refugee mother who was pregnant out of wedlock, that he was born in a tool shed behind a hotel, that he was raised in poverty, that he spent his young adulthood leading a fledgling religious movement that most people didn't understand. They said, what is this, a revolution? Is this a new religion? Like, what are you saying exactly? From friend and foe alike. Like, where's the should get like a PR guy or something. He never found a title that properly fit. In fact, he seemed to spend most of his time trying to dodge them, which is so reassuring. Messiah, king, prophet. He remained in the margins and without a home until he was killed by the empire and his own religion before he turned 35. So if anything, I think one of the primary lessons this story offers us is that even if we're determined in our search for God, like our God detector mostly isn't, it's not very reliable, We need some better technology. And the technology that's offered, that we keep finding in the scriptures over and over again, is not this invitation to look over here, out there, but to begin to look maybe in the last place we'd expect to find God, which is in here for some. And as we begin to look in here, what do we find? I mean, I've found all kinds of stuff. I found things that would make that, whatever that fish is with the little light bulb and the pointy teeth down there at the bottom of the ocean, make him look like a suitable pet, And you find it and you want to say, you made me do that. Or this circumstance caused this foreign response to come out of me. There's this proverb that says, like, when a cup is bumped, the only thing it can spill is whatever it contains. And so there's a Latin expression that Carl Jung cited often. And it goes, actually, one of you want to pronounce this for me? Just try that Latin part up top. Insterquilinus? Yeah. Invenitor. In filth it will be found. That which you most need to find will be found where you least wish to look. That which you most need to find will be found where you least wish to look. And so I wonder, what have you found poking your head around in here, you know? What have you come to know about yourself in your own investigations? Jung talked about the persona, which is where we get the word personality. It's a Greek word. It actually means mask, persona. And it's the kind of us that we most readily present. And like a mask, you know, kind of, most of us have a couple different versions. Persona. Jung also introduced this concept that's really worked its way into the vernacular of the culture, but at the time was unheard of, and it was the shadow self. That we have a persona that we like to present, and then we also have a shadow. Our persona is who it is that we think that we are. Our shadow is who it is that we hope that we aren't. Which is to say, everything about ourselves that we've rejected or despised or denied. But primarily, the shadow is anything about ourselves that we just never knew was there. Somebody asked Jung one time, how do you find your shadow? And he said, how do you find the dragon that swallowed you? And the most encouraging thing about all of this to me, it's called shadow work, is that the shadow, by definition, is anything about ourselves that we don't know. And so as soon as anything is brought into consciousness, as soon as we become aware of an aspect of ourselves that we did not know was there before, then we've already begun the process and the work of integration. From here, it isn't banishment. I don't square off. But to become awakened, to become enlightened, to begin to see clearly, is not accomplished primarily through imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The other part of that saying is this: until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life and we'll call it fate. So this is one of my favorite stories in all the scriptures. It's told in 3 out of 4 Gospels. We're going to look at Matthew's telling of it. And it's the story of who do you say that I am? You know, this one where Jesus asks his followers. And so to set the stage for that conversation, I think it's interesting that the gospel writer Matthew, he actually makes sure to include the exact location where Jesus made this statement. It was a region called Caesarea Philippi. It was at the base of Mount Hermon, where a large cliff jutted out from the rocks. And this place was a worship center at the time for the gods of the day. It was Pan. It was Pan's labyrinth, actually. You know, where the guy's got the eyeballs in his hand. Ugh. I don't like scary movies. It was a place of strange sexual rites of religious passage. The pagan god Baal was believed to have lived at the top of the mountain. And from out of this cave flowed a little stream, and it was believed that the gods entered our world and exited with the souls of the deceased along this stream. The locals believed it was the gates to the underworld. It was a cavernous and spooky area. No honest Jew would be caught dead hanging out around there. It was a haunted house inside of a red light district, and it was actually forbidden to even journey into the region. And Jesus went 32 miles out of his way to take his disciples, who were probably like a bunch of teenagers at the time, into this place that no respectable Jew would be found dead. I would assume they'd be found dead. You weren't allowed to go there. What's the interesting thing about places that you aren't allowed to go? Our kids go to school that used to be hosted at this Presbyterian church up the road. That really pretty one. That's like on the way to Home Depot. You know that one? It's got like a courtyard. And on their first day of school, when they were new to school, there was like an orientation meeting, and one of the pastors from the church came and gave us a like really big like welcome. We're glad that you're here. And she was like super warm and said, we really want you to feel home here, and we're so glad that you're here, and we want your kids to feel home here and to know that they're, you know, that this is their space too, and to really settle into the place, except for the sanctorium sanatorium or something, you know, some mysterious sounding Latin thing. She's under no circumstances shall the children or anyone enter this room. And I never do things like this. It just kind of came out of my mouth. I was like, you do realize you've just made that the most interesting place in the universe. So Jesus went 32 miles out of his way to take his gang of followers, most of them in their late teens or early 20s, to this area where you aren't allowed to go. And they must have been shocked. And that's the backdrop. That's what frames this conversation. And so we read, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? And they said, well, some say John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and still others, Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. And then he asks a significantly more important question. Well, what about you? Who do you say that I am? And Peter answered, you are the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, blessed are you, Simon. For these words, what's been revealed and spoken to you, are not your words. It's not your idea. You didn't deduce this or put the facts together. The place you are speaking from, the voice you are using, is my Father in heaven. Blessed are you. And then he told his disciples not to tell anybody that he was the Messiah. And from that time on, we read, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. Next verse. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. If we just stopped right there, it would probably be helpful to observe that the word never is a pretty dangerous word. He says, never. And then Jesus turns to Peter and he says, get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me. You don't have in mind the concerns of God, but just human concerns. And what strikes me as so fascinating about this story is that within minutes, in the exact same location, Jesus, the perfect mirror, reflects back to Peter aspects of his being that maybe he was not yet familiar with himself. That there within the span of minutes comes darkness and light. The Spirit and the Satan, the accuser, in the enlightened one. It's all right there. And the gift, the benefit, the grace of the tense situations that we go through in life, the parts of life that truly do overwhelm us and move us past. What's the saying that God will never give you more than you can handle? And it's like true and not true at the same time. The reason it's true and not true at the same time is it kind of all depends on who that you is. Because there's a part of us that the only real medicine is to be moved through situations and circumstances that we really can't handle. To be tested in a way that, like, the cup isn't just bumped, but the whole thing gets knocked over and it all spills out. Light and shadow, grace and anger, patience and short temper. And maybe what matters most in situations and circumstances like these, I would say what matters less is the contents of the cup. And what matters more is what we do with the spill. What's the don't cry over spilled milk? Have you had that experience, I've been both the child that spilled the milk and the dad who sees the spilled milk and feels just like unmitigated rage. What is that? Life. Yes, right, the shadow, maybe it's, whether it's whole milk or chocolate milk. What matters less, what we think matters is the contents of the cup, because then the mind comes in and goes, look at you dirty dog, So much for this illusion of union, so much for this. I guess what these situations really offer is an opportunity to reckon with the fact that there is what we say we believe, and below that maybe what we think we believe. Sometimes there's a little difference there. And below that, what we actually believe. Now, the difference between what we think we believe and what we actually believe, where we won't find out without situations like this. It's how the truth is revealed. That's why I could read the messages I wrote last year and be like, oh man, you almost believed that. But at the moment, I totally believe that. And then grace, what saves us and heals us ultimately, is that below what we actually believe is reality for what it actually is. Rilke said that we're grasped by what we cannot grasp. That we're held unshakably in the arms of God. And that our experience of this reality, the way this moves from idea to experience, is only as we learn. To relax and to let go and to ease this. My sister Cece is a really good mom. They had their first daughter a little bit later in life, and so I like to think she had the advantage of watching us. But what I've seen her exemplify for Esme, for her daughter, is just patience. That I'm not sure it's not always like this, but when Esme is worked up, Cece just remains calm. And that calmness is transmitted and transmuted. And I think so it is with us. The mind freaks out and kicks and screams and has a pretty good idea of what it needs. And the heart just wants to let go and be held. And I'm going to finish this morning with this. It's a little bit of a longer quote. It's from Carl Jung also. And so, Katie, if you want to make your way up here, and Pam too. That's what Jung says. He says, that I feed the beggar, that I forgive an insult, that I love my enemy in the name of Christ. Well, all these are undoubtedly great virtues. What I do unto the least of my brethren, that I do unto Christ. But what if I should discover that the least amongst them all, the poorest of all beggars, the most impudent of all offenders, yea, the very fiend himself, that these are within me, and that I myself stand in need of the alms of my own kindness, that I myself am the enemy who must be loved? What then? Well, then, as a rule, the whole truth of Christianity is reversed. There's no more talk of love and long-suffering. We say to the brother within us, Raka, like you fool, and condemn and rage against ourselves. We hide him from the world. We deny ever having met this least among the lowly in ourselves. And had it been God himself who drew near to us in this despicable form, we should have denied him 1,000 times before a single cock crowed. And so to put this in kinder words, the only way to come into the truth of who we are is to accept the totality of who we are. Even though that process will take, God only knows how long. And to learn to accept and to treat with kindness the aspects of ourselves that we discover along the way that are less than pleasant. To accept and to embrace these parts is the process of integration, which really is the word religion. It means it's re-ligament. It's to rejoin parts and pieces that have become separated. That's where the word comes from. And James says, true religion is this: to care after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. And I think the wisdom of this passage is to recognize that the orphans and widows that are in distress are often located within ourselves, and the more we tend to these parts of ourselves patiently and kindly, and then the more naturally we'll extend the same mercy and kindness to the world around us. So It is 11:12, so we've got some time together here for reflection. The communion elements will be available, and you really are invited and welcome to use this time and space however you feel would be most helpful for you. So you can talk and pray with each other. You can come and receive communion. You can sing along to the tunes. You can take a nap on the upper tier. Just make yourselves at home, and I'll come up and let us know when it's 11:30. But got it.